That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day became a story the whole community tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind struggle and silence, there are still human hearts. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant rain, the kind that seeped into bones long before it touched skin. It was just after dawn, in the outskirts of a forgotten town, where the highway blurred into gravel roads flanked by chain-link fences and overgrown lots. The wind whispered through the skeletal branches of leafless trees, carrying the faint, metallic tang of rust from abandoned cars. Alex hunched against the chill, his threadbare jacket pulled tight around his shoulders, the fabric worn thin from too many nights under open skies. At 17, he had learned to make himself small, invisible, a shadow slipping between the cracks of a world that had no place for runaways like him. His boots crunched softly on the loose stones as he navigated the edge of the old industrial park, eyes scanning the ground for anything useful. A discarded bottle for water, a scrap of cardboard to shield against the wet. The guilt that gnawed at him was a constant companion, born from the night he'd fled his foster home 3 years ago, leaving behind a little brother he couldn't protect from the shouting matches and broken promises. Alex had run to escape the cycle, but freedom felt more like a cage of solitude. He avoided eye contact with passers-by, knowing the judgment in their stares. Just another kid wasting away, a problem to be swept aside. Society saw him as a ghost, unworthy of notice, let alone compassion. But deep down, beneath the layers of dirt and distrust, Alex carried a quiet moral compass, one that tugged at him whenever he witnessed cruelty he couldn't ignore. That morning, the usual quiet was shattered by a low rumble, like thunder rolling in from the horizon. Alex froze, his heartbeat quickening in the silence that followed. He crouched behind a rusted dumpster, peering out at the narrow alley that cut through the park. 2 black vans idled there, their engines humming with menace, exhaust curling like smoke signals in the cold air. Men in dark jackets spilled out, their movements sharp and coordinated, voices muffled but urgent. One of them yanked open the back door of the first van, and a sharp bark pierced the air, a sound raw with fear and defiance. Alex's breath caught. It wasn't just any dog. This one was built strong, with a sleek coat and alert eyes, a service vest still strapped to its chest, faded insignia glinting in the weak light. The dog lunged against a makeshift leash, teeth bared, but a rough hand shoved it back into a crate. "Easy, mutt," one of the men growled, his voice gravelly from too many cigarettes. "This one's worth a fortune to the right buyer." Traffickers. Alex had heard whispers of them in the underbelly of the streets, preying on strays, exotics, anything that could be flipped for cash in underground rings. But this dog wasn't ordinary. Its posture screamed training, loyalty forged in places far harsher than these alleys. Alex's hands trembled as he gripped the dumpster's edge, memories flooding back unbidden. The neighbor's old hound he'd once fed scraps to, back before everything fell apart. He could walk away. He always did. Keep moving, stay unseen. That was survival. Yet something held him there, rooted like the weeds pushing through cracked concrete. The dog's eyes met his for a split second through the crate's bars, wide and pleading, a silent accusation that stirred the guilt he'd buried deep. Alex's chest tightened, his pulse thundering in his ears. The men were loading more crates now, shadows shifting under the overcast sky, the wind picking up to whip grit against his face. He could smell the fear sweat from the animals, mixed with the oily sharpness of the van's tires. One of the traffickers paused, scanning the perimeter, his hand resting on a bulge at his hip that suggested more than just threats. Alex pressed flatter against the metal, cold, seeping through his clothes, his mind racing. "Run!" it screamed. But the dog whimpered again, a sound that cut through the morning haze like a knife. In the distance, beyond the industrial sprawl, the faint outline of the military base loomed. Fort Harlan, a relic of old wars, now home to retired soldiers and their unbreakable bonds. Alex had skirted its edges before, drawn by the occasional bark of K9 units during drills, the crunch of gravel under Humvees patrolling the perimeter. The base was a world unto itself, guarded by fences and protocols, where veterans like Sergeant Elias Grant lived out their days. Elias, a grizzled man in his late 50s, had served 3 tours in the desert, his life intertwined with his service dog Rex, a German shepherd who'd saved him from an IED blast years ago. Rex wasn't just a pet, he was a lifeline, pulling Elias from the nightmares that still woke him in sweats. The old soldier walked the base paths each morning, Rex at his side, their routine as steady as the ticking of a clock. But that day, Rex had slipped his leash during a rare venture off base, chasing a scent into the wilds of the industrial park. Elias would be searching now, his calls echoing unanswered. Alex shifted, pebbles shifting under his weight, drawing a glance from one of the men. The trafficker's eyes narrowed, but he turned back to securing the crate. The dog's barks grew frantic, muffled by the van's closing doors. Alex's moral wound reopened like an old scar, the same helplessness he'd felt abandoning his brother, the weight of choosing safety over standing firm. He wasn't a hero. Heroes didn't sleep in alleys. But as the van's engines revved, preparing to pull away, a quiet determination flickered in his chest. The cold bit deeper, the wind howling like a warning. But Alex straightened, his breath steadying. No one else was coming. If he didn't act, that dog, that loyal shadow of a man who'd given everything, would vanish into the shadows of exploitation. The first van lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, and Alex moved before he could think, darting from cover with the stealth of someone who'd evaded worse than this. His heart pounded against his ribs, each step a gamble in the grey dawn light. The second van blocked his path, its side mirror catching the pale sun. He circled wide, the smell of exhaust choking him, the distant hum of the base, a mocking reminder of worlds he'd never enter. But in that moment, with the dog's fate hanging by a thread, Alex chose to be seen. For once, the overlooked boy stepped into the light, his hands steady despite the tremor in his soul. The vans rumbled forward, their tires grinding against the uneven gravel like teeth on bone, kicking up clouds of dust that stung Alex's eyes. He sprinted low, weaving between rusted barrels and splintered pallets, his breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts that burned his lungs. The industrial park stretched out like a labyrinth of decay, twisted metal skeletons of forgotten factories looming under the slate-grey sky, the air thick with the acrid bite of old oil and mildew. Alex's sneakers slapped against the cold ground, each step echoing his racing pulse, a drumbeat urging him onward even as fear clawed at his gut. He wasn't built for this. His frame was lean from skipped meals, his hands calloused from scavenging, not fighting. But the image of those pleading eyes in the crate propelled him. A tether to the boy he'd been before running became his only refuge. He cut left, paralleling the alley's edge, the second van now pulling ahead to join the first. The traffickers inside laughed coarsely, their voices carrying snippets over the engine's growl. Talk of markets in shadowed warehouses, prices for prime stock. Alex's stomach twisted at the casual cruelty, the way they reduced life to commodity. He spotted a narrow gap between 2 derelict sheds, just wide enough for him to slip through if he timed it right. The lead van slowed at a pothole, its brake lights flaring red like warning embers, and Alex seized the moment. He lunged, grabbing the rear bumper with both hands, his fingers slipping on the dew-slick metal before finding purchase. The jolt yanked him forward, his body swinging perilously close to the spinning wheels, gravel spraying his legs like shrapnel. Hanging on, he peered through the tinted rear window. catching glimpses of the crates stacked haphazardly inside. Rex's form shifted in the dimness, a low whine escaping the confines, muffled but insistent, like a heartbeat fighting to be heard. Alex's arms burned, muscles screaming from the strain, but he held tight as the van accelerated onto the cracked asphalt of the access road. The wind whipped at his face, carrying the faint, salty tang of distant ocean air mixed with the exhaust's choking fumes. His mind flashed to his brother Tommy, small, wide-eyed, clutching a frayed blanket during those endless nights of chaos. Alex had promised to protect him, whispered it in the dark, but when the foster father's rage boiled over one final time, fear had won. He'd slipped out the window, leaving Tommy to the storm. That abandonment was his scar, a quiet ache that made every act of cowardice sting deeper. Not this time, he thought, though doubt gnawed at him. What could one kid do against men like these? The van swerved onto the main highway, the industrial park, shrinking in the side mirrors, giving way to sparse traffic and the skeletal outlines of billboards advertising lives Alex could only imagine. He couldn't hold on forever. Already his grip faltered, fingers numbing from the cold metal. Up ahead, the lead van signaled a turn toward the old warehouse district, a no-man's land of boarded-up buildings and flickering street lamps, even in daylight. Alex's heart sank. This was trafficker territory, whispers of it circulating among the street kids like ghost stories. He had to act now. Before they vanished into that maze, with a surge of adrenaline, he swung his legs up, hooking one foot onto the undercarriage for leverage, then pounded his fist against the rear door. The bang echoed sharply, startling even him. Inside, the dog barked furiously, the sound fueling Rex's struggle against his bonds. One of the men twisted in his seat, cursing under his breath. "What the hell? Pull over, something's on us." The van lurched to a stop at the highway's shoulder, tires screeching on loose stones, the sudden halt nearly flinging Alex free. He dropped to the ground in a crouch, rolling behind a cluster of overgrown bushes just as the back doors flew open. Two men emerged, their boots thudding heavily on the asphalt, faces hardened by suspicion and the chill wind that rustled the dry leaves around them. One was burly, with a scarred knuckles and a tattoo snaking up his neck. The other slimmer, eyes darting like a cornered animal's. "Probably just a bump," the burly one muttered, scanning the empty road, but his hand hovered near his belt, fingers brushing the outline of a concealed weapon. Alex held his breath, the earth damp and cool beneath him, thorns from the bushes pricking his skin like accusations. The scent of wet soil and distant pine mingled with his own sweat, sharp and metallic. He could bolt now, melt back into invisibility, but the crate's shadows loomed in the open doors. Rex's form visible, taut muscles straining, vest torn but bearing the faded emblem of a military unit, a shepherd's star that spoke of battles won and loyalties unbroken. Alex's throat tightened. That dog wasn't just cargo. It was a piece of someone, a bond forged in fire. The men stepped closer to inspect, one kicking at the undercarriage where Alex had clung, oblivious to his presence. "Clear," the slim one said. But his voice carried an edge, the kind that came from lives built on paranoia. In the distance, the faint rumble of engines approached, not civilian cars, but heavier, purposeful, like the growl of military transports. Alex's eyes widened. It was the base patrols, Humvees from Fort Harlan, making their routine sweep along the perimeter road. The veterans there, retired but ever vigilant, kept the edges sharp against threats real and imagined. Sergeant Elias Grant would be among them, his search for Rex turning frantic by now, the old man's calls for his companion lost to the wind. Elias, with his weathered face etched by desert suns and loss, had found in Rex not just a dog, but a mirror to his own survival. The world saw the base as a fortress of rigid discipline, a place of salutes and silence, where broken soldiers hid their scars. Outsiders whispered of cold hierarchies, veterans barking orders like ghosts of wars past, their canine units more machine than mercy. But Alex had glimpsed the truth from afar. Quiet gatherings around flickering fire pits, hands scarred by service clasping shoulders in unspoken understanding. Dogs leaning into their handlers with a devotion that healed what words couldn't. The traffickers slammed the doors shut, the van's engine roaring back to life, but the approaching rumble grew louder, headlights cutting through the morning mist like beacons. One of the men froze, peering toward the sound. Cops? No, military. Shit, let's move. They piled back in, the vehicle peeling away with a squeal, leaving Alex exposed on the roadside. He scrambled to his feet, dirt caking his jeans, and waved his arms wildly as the first Humvee crested the rise. Its tires crunched to a halt, gravel spraying, and a door swung open. A veteran in faded fatigues stepped out, his posture straight despite the limp from an old wound, dog tags glinting against his chest. "Kid, you okay? What's the rush?" His voice was gruff, but his eyes, sharp, assessing, held no judgment, only the quiet readiness of someone who'd seen too much to dismiss a cry for help. Alex gasped for air, pointing down the road where the vans disappeared around a bend. The dog, in the back. They're taking it. Traffickers. It's a service dog, black and tan, vest like yours. The words tumbled out raw and unpolished, his hands gesturing frantically. The veteran's face shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his features, the kind born from shared symbols of sacrifice. He radioed it in, static crackling like distant thunder, and within moments more vehicles converged, trucks from the base, their engines a low, reassuring hum. Alex stood there, trembling not from cold, but from the weight of being seen, his moral compass finally pointing toward something solid. The chase was on, but in that instant, the overlooked Runaway felt the first stirrings of a world that might just claim him as its own. The Humvees surged forward in a tight formation, their tires biting into the asphalt with a relentless growl that drowned out the morning's fragile quiet. Alex clung to the side of the lead vehicle, wedged between the door and the veteran's solid frame, the wind tearing at his jacket like insistent fingers. The air rushed past, cool and laced with the sharp scent of pine from the roadside trees, mingling with the diesel fumes that made his eyes water. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a reminder of the line he'd crossed, no longer a shadow, but part of this unfolding storm. The veteran, who introduced himself as Corporal Hale, gripped the radio with a steady hand, his knuckles white against the worn plastic. "Base, this is Patrol 3. We've got a sighting, possible traffickers with a K9 unit, black and tan shepherd service vest, heading warehouse district, 2 vans, need backup now." Static hissed in response, followed by a clipped acknowledgement from the command post at Fort Harlan. Alex glanced back as more trucks joined the convoy, their headlights piercing the mist like determined eyes. Gravel crunching under heavy treads. The base visible now in the distance, a sprawl of low barracks and chain link under a flat sky, hummed with awakening life. Soldiers spilled from gates, rifles slung but not raised, their movements precise, born of drills that echoed long after the wars ended. To the outside world, Fort Harlan was a relic, a place where retired warriors, like Sergeant Elias Grant, withdrew into rigid routines, their silence mistaken for isolation. People whispered of hierarchies carved in stone, veterans at the top, barking orders to keep the ghosts at bay, K9 units patrolling like mechanical sentinels. But Alex, from his vantage of fringes, had seen the undercurrents, the way a handler would pause to scratch an ear, the soft whines of dogs sensing their partner's unspoken pain, the quiet nods exchanged over steaming coffee in the mess hall. These men and women weren't cold, they were cauterized, their compassion armored against a world that had taken too much. The warehouse district loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette of rusting silos and boarded facades, the wind whistling through gaps like mournful sighs. The vans had vanished into its maze, but Hale's eyes narrowed on the faint tire tracks veering off the main drag. "They'll hole up in there," he muttered, more to himself than Alex, his voice roughened by years of sand and shouts. "Traffickers love the blind spots, easy to vanish, harder to track." Alex nodded, though his throat was dry, the adrenaline sharpening every sense. The vibration of the engine through his bones, the metallic tang of the veteran's dog tags brushing his arm, the distant bark that cut through the din. Rex, fighting still. Guilt twisted in Alex's gut, not just for his brother, but for every time he'd looked away, every shadow he'd melted into. This pursuit was his reckoning, a bridge from solitude to something raw and real. They barreled through the entrance, the convoy fanning out like a living barrier, trucks blocking side streets with deliberate thuds. Dust billowed in choking clouds, settling on Alex's tongue like regret as spotters leaped out, boots pounding the cracked pavement. Radios crackled with coordinates, voices overlapping in terse rhythm. Visual on the lead van, north end by the old mill. Hale pulled Alex aside, his grip firm but not unkind, positioning him behind a weathered crate stack. "Stay low, kid. This ain't a game." Alex crouched, peering through the slats, his breath shallow, hands trembling against the splintered wood. The air grew thicker here, heavy with the musty rot of abandoned grain and the faint underlying fear sweat from hidden corners. Shadows shifted in the periphery, stray cats scattering, the wind rattling loose metal like distant gunfire. Ahead, the lead van screeched to a halt in a shadowed courtyard, doors banging open as the traffickers spilled out, crates in hand. The burly one from earlier yanked at Rex's leash, the dog lunging with a snarl that echoed off the walls, his teeth flashing white in the dim light. "Get this thing inside before the heat shows," he barked, shoving the crate toward a yawning warehouse door, its hinges groaning like a wounded beast. The slim man covered him, pistol drawn now, glinting dully as he scanned the approaches. Alex's pulse thundered, the scene blurring at the edges. Rex's vest caught the faint sunlight, the embroidered K9 emblem, a beacon of what had been stolen. He thought of Elias, somewhere back at the base, pacing the gravel paths, his calls unanswered, the old soldier's world fracturing without his anchor. Veterans like him carried invisible wounds, nights haunted by desert winds, the bark of a lost comrade pulling them from the edge. Society judged them as distant, their loyalty to unit and dog a barrier rather than a bond. But in truth, it was their salvation, a quiet heroism woven into every shared glance. The convoy closed in, engines cutting to a low rumble, soldiers dismounting in fluid silence, dozens now, forming a perimeter with the precision of old instincts. A K9 handler whistled sharply, his own shepherd straining at the leash, ears pricked toward the warehouse. Alex's chest tightened. This was the emotional turn he hadn't anticipated. Amid the tension, one soldier, a woman with a scar tracing her jaw, paused near him, her eyes meeting his for a beat. "You the one who spotted it?" she asked softly, her voice cutting through the wind. Alex nodded, words failing, but she placed a hand on his shoulder, brief and steady. "Brave call. Reminds me of my brother. Ran once. He thought he had to face it alone." Her words hung, a mirror to his own flight, stirring the moral conflict he'd buried. Everyone else might freeze in the face of such odds, but here, in this unlikely assembly, action bloomed from shared scars. Gunfire cracked suddenly, warning shots from the traffickers, ricocheting off concrete with sharp pings that made Alex flinch, the acrid smell of powder blooming in the air. The soldiers advanced, shields up, voices calling for surrender in measured tones, their boots a steady cadence on the grit. Rex's barks grew frantic, a rallying cry that spurred the K9 units forward, leashes snapping taut. Hale motioned Alex back, but he edged closer, unable to look away, the rising tension coiling like a spring in his veins. One trafficker bolted from the shadows, crate under arm, only to be tackled by a blur of fur and fangs. A handler's dog bringing him down with controlled fury, the man's curses muffled by the scuffle. Adrenaline surged through Alex, fear mingling with a fierce determination. This wasn't just rescue, it was redemption, his small act rippling into a tide of loyalty. As the warehouse doors burst open under a coordinated push, the wind howled through the breach, carrying the dog's triumphant howl. Alex's hands steadied, the cold seeping away, replaced by the warmth of purpose. The overlooked Runaway had ignited something profound, a chain of compassion in a place where silence once reigned. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The chaos erupted in a symphony of controlled fury, the warehouse's cavernous interior swallowing the echoes of shouts and scuffling boots like a hungry void. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing through cracked skylights, the air thick with the musty decay of forgotten silos and the sharp tang of gunpowder lingering from the warning shots. Alex pressed himself against the rough-hewn wall outside, the concrete cool and unyielding against his back, his breath shallow and measured to avoid drawing attention. Inside, the traffickers' voices rose in a frantic crescendo, punctuated by Rex's defiant barks that reverberated like thunderclaps in the confined space. The dog's loyalty wasn't just instinct. It was a testament to bonds forged in the unforgiving heat of distant sands, where every command had meant survival. Hale's team moved like a single organism, operators fanning out through the doorway with rifles at low ready, their silhouettes sharp against the dim interior. The veterans' hand signals were subtle, fingers slicing the air, a nod here, a pause there, directing the flow with the precision of a man who'd navigated ambushes under moonless skies. Alex peered through a jagged gap in the boarded window, his heart a wild drum in his chest, each beat syncing with the distant thrum of helicopter blades approaching from the base. Fort Harlan's rotors sliced the air, a low whomp-whomp that vibrated through the ground, stirring the loose gravel into swirling eddies. The reinforcements were en route, but in this suspended moment, the weight of the confrontation pressed down, heavy as the rusted beams overhead. One of the traffickers lunged from behind a stack of moldering crates, his face twisted in desperation, pistol whipping through the air in a wild arc. "Back off! This ain't your fight!" he snarled, his voice cracking under the strain, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill seeping from the concrete floors. A SWAT-trained veteran from the Edge unit, retired but recalled for the urgency, sidestepped with fluid grace, his shield absorbing the glancing shot with a metallic clang that rang out like a struck bell. The impact reverberated through the man's arm, but he didn't flinch, his eyes locked forward, breath steady through the tactical mask. These soldiers weren't the distant figures society imagined, hollowed out by war and walled off in their barracks. No, their toughness masked a deeper compassion, the kind that bloomed in quiet moments around the K9 kennels, where handlers whispered encouragements to their partners after a long night of patrols. Rex's crate rattled violently from deeper within, the wood splintering under the dog's relentless assault, his paws scraping against the bars with a frantic rhythm that clawed at Alex's resolve. The Runaway's hands clenched into fists, nails digging into palms already raw from the earlier climb, the sting a grounding pain amid the adrenaline's haze. He could smell the warehouse's innards now, damp rot mingled with the faint coppery hint of blood from a minor scuffle, and beneath it all, the earthy musk of the shepherd's fur, wild and untamed. Memories surged unbidden, Tommy's small hand in his during those foster home nights, the promise of protection shattered by his flight. Alex had run to save himself, but in doing so, he'd left a void, a guilt that echoed in every shadow he hid within. Watching the soldiers press forward, their formation unyielding yet measured, he felt that wound reopen, the moral conflict twisting like a knife. Why fight for a dog when he'd failed his own blood? Yet here he was, drawn inexorably into the fray, unable to turn away from the plea in those unseen eyes. The burly trafficker emerged from a side alcove, dragging the crate with brute force, Rex's snarls muffled but fierce, his body slamming against the confines in a bid for freedom. "You want it? Come get it!" the man bellowed, kicking over a rusted barrel that clanged across the floor, spilling oily residue that slicked the path. Hale's voice cut through the din, calm and authoritative, an anchor in the storm. "Stand down! The dog's coming home! No one's walking out with blood on their hands today." But the trafficker fired blindly, the shot whizzing past a handler's shoulder, embedding in the wall with a puff of plaster dust that coated Alex's tongue like chalk. The K9 units responded in kind, leashes released in a blur. 3 shepherds bounding forward, their barks a unified chorus that filled the space, muscles rippling under sleek coats as they flanked the threat. 1 dog, a sleek Belgian Malinois named Scout, herded the slim trafficker against a pillar, teeth bared in a low growl that vibrated through the air, her handler's whistle guiding her with whispered precision. The man dropped his weapon, hands raised, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of those unblinking eyes. Alex's pulse raced, the scene unfolding in hyper-focused clarity. The flicker of fluorescent bulbs overhead, buzzing erratically, casting erratic shadows that danced like spectres. The cool draft whispering through the breaches, carrying the faint scent of rain on the horizon. The subtle tremor in Hale's stance, not fear, but the controlled tension of a man balancing justice with mercy. These veterans, judged by outsiders as relics clinging to outdated codes, embodied a quiet heroism, their interventions not for glory, but for the unspoken vow to protect what war had taught them to value most, loyalty, unyielding and pure. Deeper in, the confrontation peaked as the lead operator reached Rex's crate, the dog quieting at the sight of the familiar vest patterns, his tail thumping weakly against the wood. The burly man charged, a makeshift pipe swinging, but 2 soldiers converged, tackling him to the grimy floor with a thud that shook the nearby shelves, tools clattering like falling stars. "Secure him!" Hale ordered, his voice steady, though his eyes softened as the crate's latch clicked open. Rex burst free in a whirlwind of fur and muscle, shaking off the remnants of his bonds, his nose twitching toward the fresh air. He didn't lunge at the fallen trafficker. Instead, he pressed against the operator's leg, a low whine escaping his throat, as if recognizing the scent of home amid the chaos. Alex stepped forward instinctively, unable to stay hidden any longer, his boots scraping the threshold. The warehouse fell into a hushed aftermath, radios crackling with confirmations of containment, the helicopter's downdraft now a steady roar outside as it circled for extraction. Hale turned, spotting him, and for a moment the veteran's face held a flicker of something profound, recognition, perhaps, of the runaway's mirrored solitude. "You started this, kid," he said, his tone gruff but laced with respect, extending a hand scarred by shrapnel. Alex took it, the grip warm and firm, a bridge across the chasm of his isolation. The rising tension crested, not in violence, but in the quiet release of purpose fulfilled, the air lightening as if the warehouse itself exhaled. Outside, the convoy reformed, crates emptied of their illicit cargo, the traffickers cuffed and loaded into waiting transports under the watchful eyes of the base's extended family. Rex was led to a Humvee, his gait steady despite the ordeal, pausing to nuzzle Hale's hand before vanishing into the vehicle. Alex stood amid the dispersing group, the wind picking up to scatter leaves across the lot, the first drops of rain pattering like tentative applause. The moral danger had passed, but the adrenaline's echo lingered, stirring the guilt into something sharper, a determination to face what he'd fled. In the distance, Fort Harlan's lights beckoned, a constellation of second chances where the overlooked might finally find their place. The emotional turn deepened, pulling him toward revelations yet unspoken, the base's embrace waiting like a promise in the gathering storm. The rain began in earnest as the convoy rolled back toward Fort Harlan, bat drops splattering against the Humvee's windshield like scattered tears, blurring the world into streaks of grey and green. Alex sat in the passenger seat, his clothes damp and clinging, the scent of wet earth and exhaust seeping through the cracked vents. Rex rode in the rear compartment, separated by a wire partition, his heavy breath steadying into soft pants. The occasional thump of his tail against the floor, a quiet affirmation of survival. Corporal Hale drove in focused silence, his hands loose on the wheel. The faint jingle of dog tags against his chest, the only sound breaking the rhythm of the wipers. The base's perimeter lights flickered into view, sodium glows cutting through the downpour, casting long shadows over the gravel lots, where patrols still milled like guardians of a hidden realm. Alex stared out at the passing fences, chain link glistening under the rain, his mind a whirlpool of exhaustion and unease. The adrenaline had ebbed, leaving behind a hollow ache in his limbs and a sharper one in his chest, the echo of his brother's face, Tommy's trusting eyes that had followed him into the night of his escape. He'd ignited this rescue. But what now? The soldiers around him moved with an ease born of shared history, their quiet exchanges over the radio laced with shorthand. Only they understood. All clear on the flanks, K9 secure heading to Vet Bay. To outsiders, Fort Harlan was a fortress of forgotten men, their bonds to each other and their dogs seen as rigid relics, a way to enforce order on inner chaos. But Alex sensed the undercurrent. The way Hale's glance in the rear view held a warmth reserved for the pack, the subtle nods between handlers as they checked on Rex, fingers brushing fur with a tenderness that spoke of mending fractures. They pulled into the main gate, tires crunching over puddles that mirrored the overcast sky, the air thick with the clean bite of ozone and the distant bark of other K9 units stirring in their kennels. Soldiers emerged from the barracks, rain ponchos rustling like whispers, forming a loose corridor to guide the vehicles in. Sergeant Elias Grant waited at the edge of the lot, his silhouette unmistakable, broad shoulders hunched against the wet, face lined like weathered leather, eyes scanning the Humvee with a desperation that cracked his stoic facade. When the door opened and Rex leapt out, shaking water from his coat in a spray that caught the lights, Elias dropped to one knee, his calloused hands cupping the dog's muzzle. "There you are, old boy," he murmured, a voice rough as gravel, the words barely audible over the patter of rain. Rex leaned into him, whining softly, his head resting against the veteran's chest, as if to stitch back the hours of absence. Hale clapped Elias on the shoulder, a brief contact heavy with meaning. "Found him in the warehouse district, Sarge. Traffickers had him crated up like cargo. This kid here's the one who tipped us off." He nodded toward Alex, who stood awkwardly at the vehicle's side, water dripping from his hair onto the collar of his jacket. Elias's gaze shifted, appraising, the rain tracing rivulets down his weathered cheeks. For a moment, no one spoke, the squad gathering in a loose semicircle, their boots shifting in the mud, breaths visible in the chill air. The base's floodlights hummed overhead, casting a golden halo that softened the edges of their fatigues, the scent of damp canvas and gun oil mingling with the earthy warmth of wet dog. Alex felt exposed, his pulse quickening under the weight of their attention. Not judgment, but something probing, like fingers testing an old wound. Elias rose slowly, his limp more pronounced in the slick conditions, and extended a hand. "Name's Grant. You got a name, son." Alex hesitated, then took it, the grip firm and calloused, transmitting a steadiness that grounded him. "Alex," he said, voice low, the word catching on the rain's chill. Elias studied him, eyes narrowing not in suspicion but recognition, the lines around them deepening. "Alex," You look like someone I knew once. My nephew ran off at your age. After his folks went down in a stateside crash, thought the world owed him nothing, same as it owed me after the sandbox. Hid in the shadows, too proud or too scared to ask for a hand. The words hung in the downpour, Elias's voice steady, but laced with a quiet ache, the rain drumming on ponchos like a somber accompaniment. The squad shifted subtly, heads nodding in shared memory. They'd all lost pieces of themselves to those wars, fragments carried in dog tags and faded photos tucked into wallets. Alex's throat tightened, the parallel striking like a cold wind, the runaway's flight mirroring his own, the guilt of abandonment a universal scar among these men. I couldn't just leave him, he managed, glancing at Rex, who now sat alert at Elias's feet, ears perked as if sensing the undercurrents. The dog. He looked like he belonged to someone who needed him. Elias's expression softened, a flicker of compassion breaking through the toughness, his hand resting on Rex's head. This one's more than a dog. Pulled me from a blast in Fallujah, shrapnel everywhere, dust choking the air thicker than this rain. Woke up in a field hospital, him licking my face, like I was the one who'd saved him. Lost my squad that day. He was the thread that kept me tethered. The revelation deepened the air between them, the squad drawing closer, their silence not empty, but filled with the ghosts they honored. Rex wasn't just rescued, he was a symbol of their collective survival, a living emblem of loyalties that war had tested and time couldn't erode. One by one, the veterans stepped forward, their faces illuminated by the steady glow of the lights. A handler with a prosthetic hand pressing a battalion coin into Alex's palm, its edges worn smooth from years of passage, engraved with the K9 emblem, a shepherd's profile against a star, signifying unbreakable bonds. "For spotting what we missed," the man said, his voice gruff, eyes holding the quiet heroism of second chances given. Hale followed, unclasping a spare dog tag from his neck, the metal cool and heavy as he draped it over Alex's head. "Wear it. Means you're squad now. Not by blood, but by choice. We look after our own." The chain settled against Alex's chest, a weight both literal and profound. The engraved name, Hale's own, a marker of acceptance, pulling him from the fringes into their fold. Rain continued to fall, softer now, washing away the grime of the day, but the emotional truth lingered. In saving Rex, Alex had mirrored the losses they'd all endured, reminding them of the runaways they'd been, the kin they'd failed to save. Compassion, armored in toughness, unfolded like the base's gates, offering redemption through the quiet ritual of belonging. Elias placed a hand on Alex's shoulder, guiding him toward the barracks, the squad falling in behind like a protective phalanx. The wind carried the faint scent of hot coffee from the mess hall, a promise of warmth amid the storm. As the overlooked boy took his first steps into a family forged not in silence, but in shared scars. The revelation redefined the morning's chaos, turning solitary courage into communal healing, the dog tags glinting like stars in the rain-swept night. The barracks door creaked open under Elias's hand, releasing a rush of warm air, thick with the aroma of brewed coffee and the faint, comforting musk of oiled leather from nearby gear lockers. Rain lashed against the windows in relentless sheets, drumming a steady rhythm that muffled the outside world, turning the base into a sanctuary adrift in the storm. Alex stepped inside, the floorboards groaning softly under his soaked sneakers, water pooling at his feet like unspoken confessions. The room was dimly lit by hanging lamps that cast a golden haze over scarred wooden tables and mismatched chairs, where a few veterans lingered, their faces etched with the quiet fatigue of lives measured in deployments and dawns. Rex padded ahead, shaking droplets from his coat once more, his nails clicking against the planks as he circled back to press against Elias's leg, a silent claim on the man who'd become his world. Elias guided Alex to a corner bench, the wood worn smooth from countless shoulders bearing similar weights, and pressed a steaming mug into his hands. Black coffee, bitter and grounding, its heat seeping through the ceramic to chase the chill from his fingers. The squad dispersed gradually, some to the kennels to check the other K9s, others to debrief in low murmurs by the radio console, but their glances lingered on the newcomer, not with suspicion, but with the subtle curiosity of those who'd once been outsiders themselves. Hale settled nearby, wiping rain from his brow with a sleeve, his dog tag now twin to the one around Alex's neck, a cool pendant that rose and fell with each breath. The metal held the faint inscription of service, dates, ranks, a lineage of endurance, and as Alex touched it, the emotional truth unfurled like a long-held breath, deeper than the morning's peril. "You remind me of him more than I said out there," Elias continued, his voice a low rumble that blended with the rain's patter, eyes distant as if peering through years of dust-choked memories. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his frame, Rex curling at his feet with a contented sigh, his head resting on crossed paws. "My nephew, Jamie. 15 when he bolted, after the accident took his parents. I was stateside then, fresh off rotation, trying to play uncle instead of sergeant. He saw me as just another ghost in fatigues, barking orders to keep the pain at bay. Ran to the streets, same as you, chasing shadows because staying meant facing the break." Elias's hand absently stroked Rex's ear, the dog's eyes half closed in trust, but his body tensed slightly, as if echoing the old soldier's guarded heart. The squad quieted, drawn into the orbit of the tail, their own scars surfacing in subtle shifts, a clenched jaw here, a averted gaze there. Alex's grip tightened on the mug, the steam rising to blur his vision, mirroring the haze in his chest. The parallel cut deep, stirring the guilt he'd carried like a stone in his pocket, the night he'd climbed out that foster window, leaving Tommy to the dim glow of a nightlight and the foster father's looming shadow. "I had a brother," he whispered, the words escaping unbidden, raw against the room's warmth. "Smaller than me. Promised I'd keep him safe, but I ran. Thought it'd end the yelling, the hits, woke up in alleys, wondering if he was still waiting." The confession hung in the air, heavy as the rain outside, and Elias nodded slowly, his eyes meeting Alex's with a compassion forged in losses too numerous to count. "We all run from something, son. War taught me that. Desert nights where you'd give anything for a familiar face, only to lose them to the sand. Rex here. He pulled me back when I couldn't pull myself. But Jamie, I searched those streets for months, found echoes but not him. Until now, maybe." The revelation rippled through the group, a quiet wave that redefined the rescue, not just Rex's return, but a mending of fractured lineages. One veteran, a wiry handler with silver threading his temples, rose and approached, pressing a battalion coin into Alex's palm alongside the dog tag. The disc was heavy, its surface etched with the K9 emblem, a vigilant shepherd silhouetted against a rising sun, symbolizing dawn after the darkest watches. "This is for the watch you kept," he said, his voice steady, hand lingering in a brief clasp that transmitted the base's unspoken code. Protection extended, not earned by blood, but by the courage to stand. Another stepped forward, a woman whose limp matched Elias's, unpinning a spare K9 patch from her sleeve. Black thread on olive drab, the dog's profile fierce yet loyal. She pinned it to Alex's jacket with careful fingers. The needles prick a minor echo of the morning's risks. "Wear it proud. Means you're family now. We don't leave our own in the crates." Tears pricked Alex's eyes, unbidden and hot, the symbols settling over him like armor against the solitude he'd worn too long. The dog tag chilled his skin, the coin warmed his pocket, the patch a badge of belonging that pulled him into their circle. Rex lifted his head, nose nudging Alex's knee, his warm breath a puff of forgiveness, as if the dog sensed the parallel wounds, the runaway's flight mirroring the nephew's, the service bond echoing the brother's plea. The base, misunderstood as a vault of silence, revealed its heart. Compassion cloaked in discipline, quiet heroism in every shared glance, redemption woven through the threads of community. Outside, the storm eased to a drizzle, the wind sighing through the eaves like a final release, the floodlights dimming as the night deepened. In the days that followed, Alex found his place among them, not as a ghost, but as a thread in the tapestry of Fort Harlan. Mornings blurred into routines, walking the gravel paths with Elias and Rex, the dog's steady gait syncing with his own, the air crisp with pine and purpose. Evenings brought stories around the fire pit, flames crackling against the chill, voices low as they traded tales of losses reclaimed. Tommy's face lingered in his dreams, but now with a resolve to search, to bridge the gap his flight had carved. The base's embrace, symbolized in metal and cloth, mended what the streets had torn, proving that even the overlooked could ignite a light in the shadows. The rain had washed away the grime of that fateful morning, leaving behind a clarity as profound as the desert stars Elias often spoke of, points of unwavering light in an endless night. In saving a soldier's shadow, Alex had saved a piece of himself, welcomed into a family where silence spoke of strength, and loyalty healed the deepest wounds. Compassion, quiet and unyielding, bloomed where judgment once reigned, a testament to hearts that beat beneath the armor of survival. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Alex reach more people who still believe in humanity. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Runaway saved a retired soldier's service dog from traffickers. The base welcomed him like family. See you in the next one.